Sulivan Knoth was the leader of the dangerous and vengeful cultists of the Testament of New Ezekiel. His dark beliefs about the world around him and his devotion to his angry God created much of what would occur within the game of Outlast 2. So today let's explore this man, what he did, why he did it, and how he was able to achieve this. Sulivan Knoth was born somewhere around the years 1933 to 37. By the year 1966, he was working as a shoe salesman in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Not all was well though for the man. As time went on, his financial hardships plagued him. Fearing losing everything he had, his possessions and land that would be taken away from him by the state, he turned to a late-night evangelical radio station. Even here though, in an attempt to follow a religious path, did he find little rest from the hardships of his broken world. But after more and more time listening to the station, he began to hear rumblings in the static of the transmission. He proclaimed it was the voice of God, and only himself could hear it. At this point we would become aware that because of the emotional strain and bitterness to the world doing him in, Sulivan Knoth would begin to develop delusions, or at the very least, begin to hallucinate, with these delusions being a manifestation of the anger and disdain that he had developed with the world. His idealistic view of God told him of the Lord's disdain for society, for the religions it practiced, informing Knoth that God was looking for a powerful new prophet to bring about change, order to chaos. One night, not long after these events had occurred, Knoth took to the night. Walking from his home, he gazed into a pitch-black sky, and was overcome with another delusion of grandeur. He had a vision, a warning from God, similar to that of the prophet Ezekiel from the Old Testaments. He saw the future. Knoth saw angelic creatures that wore multiple faces, bathed in fire, and encased in wheels within wheels. The iconography burned into the mind of Knoth, and the wheels within wheels would become especially important for him further down his timeline. But his path in life was clear now. Knoth had become aware of what needed to be done. A prophet and a saviour for the righteous few was in order, to ferry those who were worthy to paradise after the world came to rapture. With his mission in mind and strength of a newfound resolve, he took to the streets of his own town. He preached the beliefs in his views and his God, and recruited as many as would listen. Together, they formed a cult. They did away with their earthly possessions and instead collectively began to live life in accordance with the teachings of Knoth as the vessel of God's voice on earth. Their religion became known as the Testament of New Ezekiel, and for a time they held their communion for the large part and lived on a private luxury ranch owned by a woman named Linda Deacon, who was in fact a follower herself of the cult. However, this space wouldn't be able to support the surprising numbers that the Testament would soon begin to gain. Like-minded individuals that had suffered the hardships of modern society, that became disillusioned with their prior organizations, or simply had nothing left, would flock to the New Testament. Knoth knew that this ranch would only last so long. During the time they had it though, the ranch would grow the cult's numbers substantially, both by providing a space for more people to move in, as well as giving Knoth a new way to expand the cult's numbers. Knoth convinced the women of the Testament that they should breed excessively. This is where we would begin to learn an interesting fact about Knoth, and that was that he was a bit of a misogynist, to say the least. He convinced women and their partners to fornicate and to grow the cult's numbers. Knoth himself even assisted in the task by donating seed of his own, and even at the pleasure of the husbands of the wives, as they saw their wives bearing the fruit of Knoth's loins as a great honour. As he continued to hear the voice of God, he would craft the Gospel of Knoth, a recording of his teachings and wisdom bestowed upon him by the Lord. By this time, the cult had gained the attention of the New Mexico authorities, who were desperately searching for a way to take the cult down. The law would be granted this when Knoth decided to begin giving home births and delivering the babies himself, going against New Mexico laws. With a health and safety warrant in hand, the law enforcement raided the ranch property, discovering dead bodies, unlawful doings, and a group of angry cultists disturbed from their daily practices. Whilst a large amount of the cultists were arrested, a select group with Knoth were able to escape, with nothing else but the clothes on their back. These final disciples felt their faith begin to break and waver, and Knoth was at a loss at how to continue his church. Knoth climbed a mountain in order to commune with his God, hoping for answers to his prayers. Luckily enough for Knoth, God once again spoke and instructed him of the path ahead. In order for Knoth to see, though, he would have to obtain true vision. And to do so, God demanded a sacrifice. Knoth slit open his left eye, giving it to God in a trade for the vision of his church's future path. He foresaw a low-lying town, hidden away from the rest of civilization and society. Between mountains tall would they discover the gateway to the Temple of Paradise. This is where they needed to reach. What he foresaw was Templegate. Through great pain and trouble did they search for their new home. In the winter of 1969, Knoth and his remaining followers ventured out into the desert of Arizona. It took a whole 2 years of searching for Templegate to reveal itself, and after that another 4 before they could even call it a town. But also, as soon as their new home was discovered and completed, did Knoth realise the coming apocalypse. God had warned of dark times to come before the rapture, and that of the coming of the Antichrist, and even more terrifyingly, it would be coming from Knoth's own flock of followers. Somewhere along the lines, though, the devious Murkoff Corporation had discovered the whereabouts of the cult, their ideals, and their beliefs. They decided to beam messages of their own to Knoth, instructing him of dark deeds to save his people from the supposed rapture. They achieved this by placing a number of radio towers around the valley holding Templegate, and broadcast a form of the mutagenic engine. Murkoff, with the mutagenic engine, planted the seeds for Knoth's de-evolution, in a sense, into a more devoted and delusional fanatic of his own fantasies. His belief of the end times and Antichrist became an obsession, with weeding out the bastard child and having it slain before it could destroy the cult's chances of reaching paradise. This would come to pass in an eventual infanticide that would occur within the Templegate region. However, despite his fear of the children of his flock, the man continued his sexual encounters with any woman he desired. And now fueled by the Murkoff's testing, he would stoop to a new low of the treatment of his people when he raped the underage daughter, Anna Lee, of the cult follower Ethan. A group would eventually be cast off from the main inhabitants of Templegate. These were not enemies, however, but were simply those afflicted by horrible disease. These followers were banished to the forest lands to contain their sickness and their sin from the rest of those who followed the perfect faith of Knoth. They became known as the Skald. Something strange indeed, though, was that Knoth himself became ridden with syphilis and did not cast himself into the woods, instead remaining within Templegate in order to continue to watch over his flock and infect others. Obviously, he was capable of bending his own rules and shows that despite his claims, even his own faith was not perfect. This de-evolution and the stooping of his character, though, may very well be his undoing, as Anna Lee, after suffering her indignity, escaped the clutches of the cult and that of Knoth's right hand, the dangerous and terrifying enforcer of the cult's will, Marta. Marta was Knoth's most devout follower. This is shown in how she hated violence, but Knoth was able to convince her to take violent vengeance on those enemies of the cult, as doing nothing to appease God's will was as bad as sinning yourself. After Annalee's escape, news spread of this cult to the outside world, and so attracted attention of reporters and journalists, who wanted to unravel the secrets and dark deeds taking place in Temple Gate. This would manifest in the form of Lynn and Blake Langerman, coming to investigate after Annalee was found wandering aimlessly in the Arizona desert, and then later seemingly killed in her hospital bed by unknown means. After Knoth convinced his followers of the path and sacrifice that they must take, we really see his ability to manipulate those who have come to see him as a prophet. However, it's also likely that the morphogenic engine had a helping hand in twisting the minds of the residents of Templegate. Together, the cult sacrifices every last child to their god, sending the blessed to heaven and hopefully averting the Antichrist's rise and or birth around the year of 2013, which is when the game takes place. After this, Knoth resides to beam messages of his teachings and instructions to prepare for the rapture and end of days over the town's intercoms. And now we come to the end of days. As all paths converge, we see the arrival of the Langerman journalists, Knoth preparing his followers for a mass suicide, and last but not least, the Wall Rider. Yes, the Wall Rider had made it to Temple Gate from the Mount Massive Asylum, hell-bent on destroying anything related to the Murkoff Corporation. In its attack on the Murkoff morphogenic radio towers, set up to influence the people of Temple Gate, it didn't destroy them outright, but instead accidentally simply damaged the towers that were now beaming out erratic and frequent rounds of the engine's program onto the town below. This boiled the minds below as visions and delusions began to plague all within Templegate. Knoth's resolve became clearer, and when capturing Lynn Langerman, he dictates that her womb was definitely the one to carry the coming Antichrist. Becoming disillusioned with Knoth's teachings though, another sector of the cult broke off and instead began to desire the rapture and the coming of the Antichrist. Led by an individual known as Val, this group of heretics longed for Knoth's fear to come about and for the world to descend into hellish chaos. And as Lynn's husband Blake searches for her after she is stolen away by the heretics, he begins to lose his sanity as the world around him changes and shifts. Knoth is determined to end this chaos by having Blake, Lynn, and their presumed devil child all killed if he must. He tortures anyone with information of their whereabouts, and has all those who oppose his wishes killed, using Marta as his main enforcer. After torturing two of the inhabitants about Lynn's whereabouts, they reveal that she has been taken to the mine shafts in the area by the heretics. He has the two people killed and then sets off to enact his grand plan. Along the way, he would put the final pieces of his cult's ascension to God into motion as he poisoned them with cups of cyanide, making sure to console them with the fact that their children would be waiting for them in heaven once this mess was over. He and Marta and his disciples make a valiant effort to eliminate the spawn of hell. However, they were too late. Blake is able to find and recover Lynn as she gives birth to her child. Marta is killed by the force of a violent storm that has been brewing beforehand, and the remaining cultists had all taken their lives in order to be taken to paradise. Knoth is able to catch up with Blake after the birth and the death of Lynn. He sits with Blake and tells of the failure that had come of his religion, of his people, and of his paradise. He had made sure all his followers were killed in order to save them from hell. But now that the child had arrived, it was all for nothing. The storm had subsided and the apocalypse was now imminent. Knoth claims that God had now abandoned them. He had ceased talking through Knoth, and Knoth was left in confusion, resentment, anger, and sorrow at how the events had unfolded. He had committed terrible atrocities in the name of saving those people. Now their deaths were for nothing. Their souls were lost to deaf ears of an angry God for the failure to prevent the evil child's birth. There could be no more a perfect faith than that had occurred within Temple Gate. But God remained silent. Knoth had been abandoned, left to suffer the rapture despite his thinking otherwise. Sitting on a church pew, still talking to Blake, he begs him, stating that if Blake ever loved anything at all, he needs to kill the child. And maybe only then would the angry God be appeased. And as he prepares to make good on his sacrifices and his perfect faith, he proclaims in a sorrowful tone, "I know God don't hear dead men, but I expect he answers them," right before slitting his throat, bleeding out all over the floor of his church and bringing the cult's reign of terror and violence to a close, with the first victim of the New Testament of New Ezekiel being its last. Knoth had ended up in the same situation he had been in before his religious craze begun, with nothing, no one, and most importantly, little hope. And besides his body being recovered by Murkoff after these events, Temple Gate was the end of the line for his story in the Outlast lore. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification if you never want to miss out on another upload from Project Archivist. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a channel member through the join button on our channel homepage. You can also support Project Archivist on Patreon, where you can join a tier and earn constant rewards for your support. You can find links for both of these down in the description.